Hey everyone, welcome back. This is the Alabama Student Eagles podcast. My name is Brady Johnson.
And mine is Jill Blocker.
And today we are really excited to be joined by the Chief Counsel for Attorney General and candidate for Alabama Attorney General, Katherine Robertson. We're really excited to have her on the podcast today. I think this is going to be a great conversation. So thank you so much for joining us.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, I'm really excited about this. And we want to really learn a lot about what the Attorney General's office actually is, why you decided to run for it, some of your experiences working as the Chief Counsel under Steve Marshall for the last, I think, 10 years. Is that right?
That's right.
Yes. And so we'd love for you to share some of your experiences and some of the lessons that you've learned with our young audience out there. We've got a wide Gen Z audience tuning in today. So I think it'll be really good for you to be able to share some of your story and some of your experiences. So I'd love to just start it out for you to share a little bit about yourself and your story, your background, and how you ended up getting involved in politics.
For sure. Well, I was born in a very small town, Selma, Alabama. My family's been there since 1818, come from a long line of farmers, so not a long line of politicians necessarily. But I graduated from Auburn, went to law school at Alabama, started my career at the United States Justice Department up in Washington, later worked for Senator Jeff Sessions on the United States Senate Judiciary Committee, eventually got married to my husband who's from Auburn. We moved back to Alabama and I joined now Congressman Gary Palmer at the Alabama Policy Institute, where I was the vice president for around 4 years. That was really my first interaction with Eagle Forum, and we worked a whole lot with Eagle Forum during that time, and then joined the AG's office in late 2016, and General Marshall was sworn in early 2017, and been there ever since.
Okay. That's really cool to hear. So I'm interested if you have any leadership lessons that you've learned from all of those experiences being involved with Alabama Policy Institute and working as the Chief Counsel for Attorney General. I think it'd be really good if you could maybe share some of the lessons that you've learned or some of the experiences that you have or just some advice that you would offer for students out there who want to become better leaders and want to take on leadership roles in their communities or in their circles or just in their families. What's some advice that you could offer for some of our young listeners out there?
I think the first thing that I sort of learned when I got out into the working world and especially into, conservative legal movement was that if you are really secure in what you believe and know why you believe the things you believe, then you're a lot more confident in the positions that you take. And I think that's certainly a lesson that your generation is going to learn from Charlie Kirk. It's just, if you know why you believe the things you believe, it's just a lot easier to fight for that and defend it. And so that's one thing that my parents did for me. They helped me, establish my own principles, my conservative values, and my faith at a pretty young age. And so when I get into these high pressure moments of trying to make a hard decision, it's just not usually that hard. There may be hard circumstances to work through, but the position itself is rarely difficult for me to decide. And so I just think it's so important for y'all's generation to know why you have the positions that you have and the beliefs that you have, because then you feel very free to defend that and to follow that. I also think that working in politics, you sort of sometimes have to choose a lane. Are you going to choose like policy or politics? And we've always sort of had the mantra, and I think it has paid off, that good policy makes good politics. Yeah. Good policy ideas that lift people up and yield good results will lead to good politics. And so I think sometimes people get too focused on the immediate politics of something, whereas if you make a good decision, eventually it'll play out in your favor.
Yes, I really like that, because taking the perspective of focusing on the policy rather than the politics puts the emphasis on serving people rather than just trying to attain more power.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think that's a good perspective.
And I totally agree with what you said about knowing what you believe. It definitely helped me a lot. I remember back in 2020 when I started to get more interested in politics, because at school, my classmates were starting to also become more interested in politics, but more on the left side. Yeah. So I would ask them, I remember I would ask them questions about what they believed in, and then I would ask them why, and they wouldn't be able to answer me. And so I always knew that I could take pride in being able to say why I believed in what I believed in. Especially it makes, like you said, it makes figuring out where you stand a lot easier.
Yeah, and I think too, you know, if you get into a position like mine, or heaven forbid you're a candidate for office, you know, I think the most valuable thing you have is the ability to sleep well at night.
Yeah.
Knowing that whether it played out the way you wanted it to or not, you can defend the thing that you did, at least to yourself and to your family and to your friends. And so that's something I've always thought a lot about too. Like, if the general public doesn't understand it, you know, a lot of the things we work on are complicated. Sometimes they're not going to understand why we do the things we do, and we can't explain it in a tweet. And so it's hard to win. But if we can sleep at night and know that we did our best for the people, that's good enough sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also wanted to ask you, since you are running for Attorney General, for those who don't know, any of our viewers who don't know what that role is, could you describe to us the things that go into playing that role, playing the Attorney General?
Yeah, I could talk about it for hours. The Attorney General wears a lot of different hats. I think the two that most people are most familiar with are the fact that he is the chief law enforcement officer for our state, and he runs the people's law firm, the state's law firm. And those two roles, there's a whole lot in between those two big jobs. But I think, you know, he sets the tone for criminal justice policy in our state. He's got to make sure that, you know, we've always had the goal of Alabama being the most law enforcement friendly state in the nation, especially after what we've seen around the country over the last decade. But then too, you know, we're the only office holder that can sue on behalf of the state of Alabama. And we're the only office holder that can defend lawsuits that are filed against the state of Alabama. And so, although there's a whole lot of other things that we do, those are kind of the two big buckets. And so, you know, one of those roles is very crime related, and then the other is really almost like a national level role. We're representing Alabama and defending Alabama on the national stage alongside the 27 other Republican attorneys general. And so there's a lot that goes into it, and is a far more complex office that we could cover in this short podcast. But, you know, love to provide insight on that as we continue talking.
Yeah, that's really good. So what are some of the top issues that you've focused on during your time in the Attorney General's office? What are some of your, you know, top accomplishments that you're proud of during the time that you guys have worked there? It could be like national issues, like you were saying, or local issues here in Alabama, or cases that you defended.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with kind of the chief law enforcement officer role. You know, Alabama's prisons have been under a lot of scrutiny. May have heard about the HBO documentary that came out recently, but the trouble in our prisons was really causing Alabama to almost loosen up a little bit on being tough on crime and you know, aggressively pursuing law and order. And so when General Marshall got there, he had a background in the DA's office. I had a background, you know, in federal criminal justice policy. And so, you know, one of the first things we did was just start going to the legislature every year with criminal justice bills to really tighten our system back up, to make it more fair, more just, more transparent. So I've had the privilege of writing several criminal laws that are now on the books, and those, you know, hopefully have saved people's lives or will continue to. So those are really, you know, things that I'm really proud of. On the national level, listen, I mean, going back to the vaccine mandates that Joe Biden handed down, the Title IX redefinition that he attempted to force onto the states, preserving girls' sports, fighting for free speech on college campuses. There are so many things we've done, and the neat part about my job is that I get to play a little part in all of it. I'm not assigned to one division. I kind of have a hand in everything in a way, and so I've just gotten to be on the front lines of so many important fights, and it's just what makes me love the AG's office and made me want to run for it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool. So I heard you say something about women's sports.
Yeah.
I was going through your website earlier, and I found a little blip that intrigued me. You were talking about fighting for women's rights in sports, and also free speech and sanctity of life, but a lot of it in like the female sphere. So being a female myself, I was a little interested and wanted to ask you about that. How do you feel about those topics in more depth?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, conservatives don't view things through the lens of gender most of the time, right? I mean, I'm not into DEI. I'm not into saying, you know, like I might be the first female attorney general, but that's neither here nor there. But I think that the left has really forced this issue. It's always about identity politics. And so much of what we've seen during my time in the AG's office has really been an attack on womanhood, an attack on, women's sports, on women's private spaces. There's not a lot of people pretending to be men. They're all pretending to be women.
Yeah.
And so I really took issue with that when Kamala Harris ran for president, and she constantly talked about a women's right to choose and abortion and that kind of thing. And I thought, but at the same time, you're not standing up for just the most basic protections for women. Yeah. And I actually wrote an op-ed about it that Newsweek published, and it was called Kamala Harris is no feminist. And I outlined all the ways that her administration, along with Joe Biden's, had been bad for women that had nothing to do with abortion. And so I guess I have gotten more passionate about issues specific to females because that's what the left has been forcing on us. And, I'm obviously a girl. I have a daughter, and I want her to grow up in a state and country that gives her all the protections that I had growing up.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I experienced that myself the other day. I went on a competition trip for my school, and while I was there, I noticed that on one side of the hallway, there was the men's restroom, and on the other side of the hallway was the women's restroom, except the men's restroom remained the men's restroom, and they had taped over the women's restroom a piece of paper that said gender neutral. And I just had this thought, you shouldn't be making any restrooms gender neutral, but if you're going to make a restroom gender neutral, why would you make it the women's restroom?
Right.
Of all, I don't know, it baffled me. And on my way out, a trans person walked in, and I was just like, I don't know, that's the first time that's happened to me. And it was very surprising, but I'm glad that we have someone like you that is running for office that might be able to help us with matters like that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it is just the most basic thing in the world that there are only two genders. This hysteria over genderlessness is what I call it, just sort of appeared overnight and then dominated everything. And now I do think it's starting to fade out thanks to some help from President Trump and also the United States Supreme Court. But, my attitude has always been as a state like ours, I mean, we live in Alabama for a reason. We live in Alabama because we don't have to deal with the kind of things the people in Washington State or California or New York deal with. But if you let any of that get a foothold here in our public schools and our universities, it's really, really hard to beat that back. We're seeing that nationally. And so we've really tried every tool we have tried to beat that back to preserve Alabama's sovereignty over these issues, our state's ability to prohibit what we want to prohibit, but just to make sure that it hadn't gotten a foothold. And that requires a lot of vigilance, and a lot of that vigilance comes from the Attorney General and sometimes the legislature, but we're there to police that stuff, and I think we've done a pretty good job.
Cool. I didn't realize what a big role that plays.
Yes, it's like, where they say you give them an inch, they take a mile. That's basically what it is, like what you're talking about with them. You can't give them that foothold, because that's what we've seen at the national level in this country, is that, the transgender movement has just taken over. Yeah. Whereas a couple decades ago, a lot of this stuff, having gender neutral bathrooms like that, or allowing men to walk into women's restrooms would be unthinkable. And now, in some states it's just accepted. But I'm curious, because obviously Alabama is a very conservative state. Yeah. So I'm curious if there's still, groups in Alabama or institutions even that are pushing for this, because it sounds like it's still a fight even here in Alabama. And obviously there's, the example that you offered, Jill, and personal examples like that. So I'm curious if there's, places where they are trying to promote this ideology, or if there's certain areas where you guys at the Attorney General's office have had to fight back against this.
Yeah, we get calls, I'd say fairly regularly, from different public school leaders or teachers or parents. I think occasionally you'll see some of this ideology creeping in through a teacher or a principal, and even though it's not allowed, it's hard to babysit
Right.
everything that goes on in a school. And so we do get calls like that. We've gotten an occasional call about sports and boys trying to participate in girls' sports and that type of thing. But our legislature has been really proactive, thankfully. And so we've got great, strong laws to point to. The most difficult thing was going to be when Biden changed the meaning of Title IX.
Right.
I mean, we had to fight that in court, and we sat in federal court about 2 weeks before the school year started in fall of 24. And I mean, if we had lost that case, I mean, certainly, we actually did lose early and appealed and won. But let's say we had lost the whole thing. I mean, Alabama's public schools would have been under that mandate. And that means teachers would have had to use the correct pronouns. Bathrooms are no longer separate. Sports are no longer separate. And so I think one thing that I talk about a lot as far as lessons learned from that is that's why we can't ever surrender our sovereignty to the federal government. We take so much federal money for public education, and we need it. We're a poor state. But man, when they start tying strings to that money, it leaves us a little bit at the mercy of whoever's in the White House. And if that's somebody that's hostile to our values, they're going to use that against us. And so something I think about a lot, something I talk about a lot, but just finding a way to reclaim our ability to govern ourselves.
Yes, that's what it's all about, self-government, being able to make decisions at the local level. And I think that's something that's really important because it's one of the beauties of the system that the Founding Fathers set up, which is that local governments and state governments actually do have a lot of power under the Constitution, which is why the Attorney General's position at the state level is so important and why the work that you're doing is so important. So I think that's really good. I was wondering, back to kind of like what you talked about earlier with your advice to young people, I thought it might be good for you to share some of your thoughts on how young people and students specifically can stand up to some of these ideologies if they have classmates or if they have teachers or professors who are teaching some of these really bad ideas and really dangerous ideas. What is the most effective way to stand up to that? Or how do you even find the courage to take a stand in the first place? Because obviously, like you said, you're on the front lines fighting against this stuff at the state level and at the national level. So what's some of your advice there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing you've got to do is educate yourself. And so if you're a student in Alabama, then you know that we have laws against teaching DEI and that kind of thing, critical race theory in the classroom. And so when you're armed with that kind of knowledge, then you can engage better. Now, certainly students are subject to they're subject to authority, and I'm not suggesting anybody, any student should take on their school leadership, but you do need to speak out. And the good thing about finding yourselves in Alabama is that there are people that are willing to stand with you. Our office is willing to. Certainly so many good groups like the ones y'all are involved with are. And so you shouldn't ever find yourself alone in that fight, but you do need to speak out. I think, probably the harder issue is what do you do when your friends start falling for all this stuff, and how do you win them over? And I think that's a big discussion that's been had, obviously, again, since Charlie Kirk's death. How do you engage other young people? Because we probably all were the beneficiaries of parents who raised us to believe their truth and the right things. And sometimes I feel sorry for people that, didn't have that opportunity. I think it's harder to learn to believe those things, the older you get when you hadn't learned it at home. And so I think Student Eagles and groups like this, it just gives people an opportunity to come and listen and welcome them with open arms as they ask questions is probably the best thing we can do.
Yeah, I agree with that. And as Christians, I feel called, and I love everyone the way the Bible tells me to. And I think that a lot of times there's a bad stigma around conservatives that maybe we're hateful towards people. Yeah. And the same stigma can also be centered around the left as well. I think, though, that when it comes to sharing your belief with somebody, like a friend of yours that doesn't agree with you anymore, I found that it really is as simple as just saying, we don't have to agree.
Yeah.
I would love it if you were on my side. I would love it if we had the same beliefs. And I want that for you because personally, I believe it's a happier way to live, right? To be a Christian conservative. And so, But I think that it's just as simple as saying we don't have to agree, but we can still be friends. You can believe what you want to believe, and I can believe what I want to believe, and we can still get along. We don't have to hate each other, and we don't have to fight. It doesn't have to be this like social justice hatred that we see so often in the media.
Yeah.
And I have said that to good friends, people who are good friends of mine now, and we still don't agree with each other, and that's okay. And like every time it seems to work, it seems to sort of put things in perspective.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times we see people for their beliefs and not as a human being. I think it's important to always remember, like, that's a person. God also created them, and it's important to love them the same way, regardless of what they believe. And I've seen it soften a lot of hearts.
That's one of the things that I despise about identity politics is everybody wants to put themselves in a
Separates.
particular lane by race, by gender, by, you know, sexual preference, whatever, by religion even. And everybody wants to identify as that first. And then they want other people to see them that way. And that really wasn't what the civil rights movement was about. That's certainly not what Christianity is about. We should treat each other like people. Now, I will say this. I do think compassion has been so badly distorted by the left.
Definitely.
To where when you say be compassionate at all, you know, for conservatives, it almost
means
sounds like you're
comply.
saying something like you should be more moderate. And that's not it. I think you can absolutely have compassion towards people who struggle with gender dysphoria, which is a mental illness. You can feel for them and want to help them and have your heart break for them, but it doesn't mean you have to celebrate it. And so that's another thing I think this generation, y'all's age group, is going to have to sort of counter, because my generation still finds all of that awfully odd. You know, we still see that as just sort of like, that's so crazy. We've never heard of that before. Y'all are going to grow up in a world where it's going to really be normalized, or to try to be. And to strike that balance of what true compassion looks like versus, you know, celebrating something that you know is not good for the person and not good for society. That's a hard balance to strike.
Yeah, and oftentimes the most compassionate thing and the most loving thing in the long run is to tell people the truth.
Yeah.
Like the
And
gospel.
instead of, you know, going along with a lie or going along with dangerous ideas, oftentimes the most loving thing to do turns out to be to stand up for what's right and to stand up for what's true.
Speak the truth in love.
Exactly. Yes.
And I'll say, I mean, look, I work in a law enforcement office. We talk tough, and
Right.
you know, that I'm not saying we've necessarily always got the platform for that, but when we're in our real everyday lives, you know, out in the world, speak the truth in love. You know.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to have those conversations with people. Do it in a way that is loving and that gives them a chance to speak their minds, but also be unafraid to boldly stand up for what you believe in. I think that's really important. And one of the best ways to do it, I think, is just by asking other people questions, because that forces them to defend their beliefs and really assess why they believe what they believe, just by asking them questions. And that's also a way you can do it without coming across as like abrasive or as you know, confrontational. Just asking good, thoughtful questions is a really good way to communicate with people who might disagree with you.
And that was mainly Charlie Kirk's motive. Was just asking people questions. Why do you believe that? And a lot of times the left arguments would crumble and the conservative arguments would rise out of the dust.
I think it's disarming this day and age to actually be willing to listen to the other side. And that's something that, I mean, you wouldn't think there's lots of varying viewpoints in Montgomery, but there actually are. I mean, my office window looks out onto the SPLC. I can't think of really a single thing I agree with them on. The ACLU is very active in Montgomery. EJI is very active in Montgomery. We don't really see eye to eye on anything. But the one thing that I would hope those groups would say about me, as we've been in rooms together and debated things and mediated things and worked on legislation, you know, I'm very consistently opposed to them. But I do try to listen and respect their point of view and you know, treat them with kindness, even though we are never going to agree. And that's okay.
Yeah. I once heard someone say about Christianity, a non-Christian, he said, he was talking about people who go door to door giving the gospel.
Yeah.
And he was saying, I mean, I understand where they're coming from. Imagine you unlocked the secret to eternal happiness and life and didn't share it. Like, you wouldn't be able to keep it to yourself. I understand where these people are coming from, whether I agree with them or not. And I think that's a really good way to think about people you disagree with. It definitely puts things into perspective, and it makes it seem like, not so hateful, because that's also the main conservative viewpoint as well, is that we're not doing it out of hate for the other side. We're doing it because we believe it is a happier, better, more fulfilling way to live. And we want everyone to be happy and fulfilled. And so whenever something comes to attack that, it's not that we hate the person, it's that we hate the ideals.
It's very difficult. I mean, I've struggled with this just even in my own head. It's very difficult to draw a hard line on your position on something and to defend it and be unwavering in it, but also come across kind and loving at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible. And I can tell you it's very difficult in the criminal justice space. You're always going to seem like you don't care about these people and they're awful and you just want to lock them up and throw away the key. And some of that is true, but you don't stop feeling sorry for people that had a bad upbringing or whatever. It's just that you prioritize the victim of the crime more than the offender. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of times where I think, like, gosh, how did that come across? If somebody knew I was a Christian, how did the way I explained that come across? And it's very difficult because I have very firm convictions on a lot of issues, and it's, you just, you struggle to communicate your firmness in a way that's also somehow loving.
Mm-hmm.
That's why it's important to know what you believe ahead of time. Because if you go in with strong values and you know what you stand for, then it's easier to make those decisions even when you might get pushback.
Yeah, because like you said, I mean, the left always tries to frame us as the group that doesn't care about real people, everyday people, their struggles and all that. And I actually think there's nothing that could be further from the truth. But it does sort of put you in a defensive posture that you don't even realize you're in when somebody starts yapping at you about a lack of compassion, lack of sympathy, what have you. We experience that a lot in the abortion space. Yeah. And you do just have to know, like, I am very comfortable with where I am. I don't have to be defensive about this position. I need to just, keep moving forward.
Yeah, and the whole bathrooms thing that I witnessed, it's not that I don't want people to be comfortable going to the bathroom. It's that I want women to feel comfortable going to the bathroom. Because I went in there and I didn't feel comfortable and I felt scared, and I saw men going into the restroom after me, and it worried me.
Yeah.
And so I was doing it I felt that way not out of like hate towards another group. I was doing it out of care and love and worry for women and myself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think this is really important, and I think this discussion is good encouragement to anybody out there listening who might have to deal with some of those difficult conversations. Because it's really important to remember that you have to stand up for what's right, and you only get one life to live, so you might as well use it standing up for what you believe in and standing up for what's right, and not being afraid to have those meaningful conversations. So I think that's really good. But I do want to turn now to your Attorney General's race. I'd love to just give you a chance to talk about why you decided to run, why you think it's important, and maybe what are some of the issues that you would focus on if elected to Attorney General.
Yeah. So I can tell you that this has not been my long-range plan. I've been in the office, as you mentioned, for 10 years, and for 9 of those years, I'd never once thought about running for office. I've worked for too many great people that have been through very difficult campaigns, and it is not something that ever appealed to me. I think some people, maybe y'all are in that category, sort of have an aspiration to that. I really haven't. I've always really enjoyed being the behind-the-scenes person, the staffer that actually had time to think and research and write and ponder and plan, and never really wanted to be the guy that whose face was on everything. But, Alabama is in a very interesting time politically because we have a governor that's been the governor for 10 years, and we'll have an attorney general who's been the attorney general for 10 years. Neither of those things are normal because you usually only have 8 years and your term limited out. Both of them fulfilled the end of someone else's term. And so there's been a steadiness to that I think people probably have in a lot of ways taken for granted. And so I just started thinking about everything that we've done and everything that I've learned, and just I've had a really great example of what a great attorney general looks like, a really honest attorney general that was principled, and sort of politics are what they are, but I've seen him do the right thing thousands more times than the Alabama public would ever get to see. And so I know the office like the back of my hand. I know everything about it. I know how it works. I know how it could work better. I know the things we could have done better. I know the things we've done well. There's just no training you could have like that other than the training that I've had. And so, look, I was hesitant to get into this. I have children, a husband, I have a very full life. I love free time. I have hobbies. You know, there are a lot of reasons to not do something like this, but I really think that it would be a huge advantage for the people of Alabama to have an attorney general that doesn't need to learn the job, because we're about to have a new governor and a new lieutenant governor and all these other people that are going to need an attorney general that has had some experience to help them work through the things they want to work through. And then we're going to have a president that has 2 years left in office that Alabama needs a lot of help from. And so in my mind, it'd be a disservice to the people for me to not offer myself and everything I've learned to continue to lead that office.
Yes.
What was it like working under Steve Marshall? Because we recently interviewed him too, and he seemed like a great guy, and we were talking about him a lot this episode. So I just wanted to ask, I know you talked about it a little bit, but I wanted to get more in depth. What was it like working for him specifically?
Well, I mean, it was a journey. It was kind of like having a big brother. You know, I came to the office just a couple months before he was sworn in. So he actually didn't hire me. The previous Attorney General,
really?
Luther Strange, did. But Luther got appointed to the United States Senate. Steve got sworn in. We didn't really know each other. And, you know, he asked me if I would stay on. He felt like I could bring something to the table. And we learned that job together. And, you know, our personalities are totally different. He's a little bit quieter, a little bit softer spoken, likes to think a long time about things. I'm pretty decisive, kind of fiery. You know, my background was very different. Mine was in policy and sort of federal perspective. His was from the DA's office. And so it made for a great partnership. And what I saw from him was just, again, very secure in what he believed, very secure in what he felt like the job was. And as we started to better understand the office and the tools at our disposal, we both felt this very weighty responsibility to actually use those tools to produce for the people of Alabama, because we both knew that there were two ways to do the job. You do the job and you use it to make headlines and to self-promote, or you do the job that nobody's ever going to know you did, the behind the scenes stuff, but that's might be where you're making just as much of a difference. And so he chose that route, and it made for more work. It made for less glory. But I think the state's better off for it. And so, again, I could not have had better training. I've never gone to him and said, I think this is what we need to do because basically it's the right thing to do. He's never once said, I'm sorry, I can't do that. You know, the politics aren't there. He has hung on through some issues that, you know, we got beat up for badly. But again, I think both of us have slept very well at night, you know, knowing that why we made the decisions we made. And so, again, I feel like I've had the best training you could ever have. And that is the only reason that I'm willing to put my name on the ballot.
All right. So if anybody is interested in supporting you or reaching out to you, do you have a campaign website, or where can people go to find you?
Yeah, Katherine4AG.com is my website. I'm on Facebook. X is KGRob27. Katherine4AG on Instagram, and would love for y'all to follow along. I'm juggling the day job, the legislature being in session, lots of good times over there, and then this campaign and being a mom on the side. And
sounds like you're pretty busy.
It's very imperfect, but I'm at least good for a follow. So
that's great.
Yeah,
awesome.
Y'all go do that.
All right, Jill, do you have a Bible verse to close us out today?
Yes, I do. Today's Bible verse is John 8:32, and it says, "And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free."
There you go. That actually ties in really well with what we talked about today.
So.
Yep.
So that's really good. Stand for truth, speak the truth. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today, and thank you, Katherine, for joining us.
Thank
it was
you so
a
much for
really
having
great
me.
conversation. Yes. All right. And thank you to everyone for tuning in today, and we will see you again next time.